So we're down in the workshop in the basement of LJ Peretti, and Todd's going to show us how he selects his briar and makes a decision as to what shape it might become. So, what you got here?
So this is a block of briar. Now I chose this block specifically for this discussion. Usually it isn't as easily seen as this. It's easily seen. So usually you can't tell the shape as easily as you can on this one or how the grain goes, but that's why I chose this one, so it could be seen a little bit easier for the sake of discussion here. So this is a great block to work from. So if you can see, a lot of pipe makers, and we all have our different ways of going about it, and I have spent a lot of my life, or my time, past 8 years or so, really studying the medium of briar. And I remember first starting off and looking at the grain here and been like, oh, if I make a line here and a line here and cut a cylinder, the grain goes this way, I'm going to have straight grain. Oh no, what if I do it on that side and that side matches to that side, I'm going to have straight grain? No. And what I started to learn for a while is looking at the back of the block right there. And I hit this with red, I sanded it and hit it with red compound so you could see. I can see how the grain splits up like that. So it's going to flare out. If you're within about plus minus 3 degrees either way, you're going to see the grain. You go much beyond that, you get spotty grain, and then under perpendicular to the grain, you're going to get bird's eye. So clearly that can make a nice Dublin or brandy, depending on which way you cut it. And possibly depending on where you go, a pot, because you're still within that plus minus 2-3 degrees. But we're gonna, and the sides are pretty similar. Where this is might not look it, you don't see it down there, but that's because the grain cuts that way, and it gets past that few degree mark. But if I'm looking at that, the grain's going pretty straight, kind of tilting there. Not there so much, but kind of straight. Right around there, it's about right in that area. It's about the same. And this is important to me. So I would usually then find an area that's fairly similar here, and then fairly uniform, not in the way it goes up. That does affect how the grain is going to twist, so to speak. Often I've noticed it causes a twisting, because you have to think of this as a three-dimensional ball, is how it started off. But it's really the spacing between these nodules that come out, really has to do with the evenness of the grain. And I noticed right around here, get a pretty even spacing. Now, the hole's drilled there, that doesn't matter, and this is going to be removed. I'm looking right there, looking at that. I got grain going that way. I got grain going that way. It's similar. I'm looking at this area right here. That grain is pretty straight. That grain is coming out like a Dublin or a brandy, whichever way you put it. So there, it's halfway in between. So probably would go with a shorter shank, or I could do it here. It's going to be a little bit more complex, but the easiest way to get, I would probably try and follow grain pretty exactly, and then judge it the other side. This pen doesn't write so well on top of the red compound. And come out a little bit. And yeah. So, and then I could easily get a little shank out of this. And this actually isn't what I would probably do from this, but it's the easiest to demonstrate. I would actually probably cut a tiny bit off there to see how it continues to break, because I know I'm not getting anything from right there.
Right.
It's a waste of briar.
Yeah.
But for the sake of discussion, we get a short little shanked, which that really isn't, compared to this pipe I'm smoking, the shank only goes to there. It's bigger than it looks, and I would measure it, and I usually taper my shanks. And then I would measure the middle of that, draw a line down. Here, marker is going to work better. So I don't have a ruler right here, but I would measure that, find the center, about there. Measure that, find the center, about there. With a ruler, do it exact. Draw down, and then if that's the top of the shank tapered, I would, do the same thing, which would be, something like this. Now, Now,
That's your draft hole. Is that what
yes. So this is where the draft hole meets the bowl. So that is very important for chucking it up, and that's where the chamber is going to be, whether I leave the plateau on or not. And that's obviously a very small pipe. Um, and then, before I even go any further, if I was going to start in the middle of the block, which I most likely wouldn't, I would find a shape, even if it's asymmetrical, that would work there. I'd probably have to freehand some to work closer to the end of the block. So I would let the block, but this is a more symmetrical shape, and I would cut it there and make sure the grain is still working. And if not, adjust the shape, asymmetrically or otherwise. But like I said, this is more an example. I might even find something that works right here and draw a shank going that way or out that way and have the bowl right there. So there are different ways to do it, but I would also compare it to this side, which is the grain that's coming out there. It's not going to be 360 straight grain around, which is difficult to get. If you do look at my pipes, and I am not saying this to brag, it's just years of studying on my own, I shoot for 360 degrees straight grain with good bird's eye on the top and bottom of the pipe. And then you would get something like, this is a pipe in progress right here, which it's slow going.
Well, I love that top.
And I'll pull off the tape. I had the tape just blocking it, so I wouldn't really nick it when I was hitting the sander. But this is, it's got a tapered shank, which is common in Italian pipe making. Danish, you typically see a thinner shank that gets bigger, and sometimes even quite big, and then a Danish style stem that doesn't quite match up to it. English is typically straight all the way across. Italian is typically thicker and gets smaller and more geometric. So this is definitely Italian. It's very geometric in nature, although this isn't going to stay sharp like that. Once I clean all this up, this is going to round up or bevel up and create a heel right there. And then I am going to have a bottom spur on this. When you look at this video, you'll probably see this on my Instagram page at Todd Brugman Finish. You'll get a better idea. And I've drawn this out. Unfortunately, I do not have the drawing with me. I am going to send it to Tom. Maybe he could insert it in the video right here. And with the drawing, you will see the stem length is about 1/3 of this. And that's my mind breaking into triplets, repeating this motif in a way of 1, 2, and then the actual bit on the stem repeats it. Bump, 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 triplets, 1/3. And I like that. Bump, a bump, a bump. It almost breaks it up into a rhythm. There's a staccato yet dynamic nature to the composition. And if you look closely, it's hard to see. The grain is fairly straight, and I can typically always get it fairly straight all the way around, even on there. Not perfectly. Occasionally it's perfectly. And beautiful. It's going to be hard to see without a stain on there. But you see the speckledness. That would be the bird's eye on top. And once I stain it, you will see more. I believe in leaving pipes as light as I can with bringing out the grain. I brought out the grain in this just by putting a lot of rouge or red compound on that. But just a little bit. If that's all I have to do, that's all I'll do. Pipes darken naturally over time because they're surrounded by smoke. So I like to keep them light. Your hand isn't always clean. That's going to darken it. Being surrounded by smoke, they're going to darken, and it's going to continue to get darker. You can always clean it up, buff it, bring it back down. But I like to start them out nice and light. If they're big inclusions in it, or lots of little black dots in it, yeah, you can hide those. But I don't even try and hide them because if it's a big flaw, I'm going to try and get my way around it or chuck it. But just work with it. So that's the gist of it. Very unusual shape. And I guess what I wanted to add is this accent right here is very Danish in nature. I'm going to bring that down a little bit smaller, so it's essentially the same size as that, but then this comes down a little bit. So there are clearly neoclassical Italian influences, Danish minimalism opposed to Danish freehand influences, although I am freehanding this, just how you have to take off where the chuck is, unless you have a phrasing machine, which I don't do my pipes that way. And yeah, I'll work with it. The stem won't match up to there. It's going to be a straight, slightly bent stem to about there, which you can see in the drawing of this pipe.
So I see most of your work where the grain is very more vertical. Have you ever done any cross cuts where the bird's eye would show more on the sides?
Yes, I have done cross grain pipes, and I do cross grain sometimes. I really like having a nice rim with the bird's eye and the straight grain around. Now, I've seen this debated on the internet, not so much these days. 10 years ago, I used to see it debated more. There's a book by Carl, the original owner of McClelland, and he talks about this quite a bit. I'm actually reading it right now, and it's something that used to be talked about a lot, and I've talked about it with other pipe makers and people in the industry, that the best two grain orientations that smoke are straight grain and cross grain, and they have their pros and cons. It's not just aesthetic, and it has to do with and I don't know the exact botanical name, but of the veins that come through in the bird's eye of draining the oils down into the wood at the bottom, so it smokes a little bit drier and not as wet if it's straight grain. And then cross grains are supposed to break in a little bit quicker and have their own pros and cons. A lot of people will debate that and say it's all the same. They do, and it is talked about bald spots, which come from generally the center of there, which are much more dense, don't absorb much, and they also have more tannins in it. Tannins are boiled out during the curing process. I've never cured a block of briar from scratch, so I can't speak too much to how that is done, but the tannins really cause that acrid taste. When you get a very high-end pipe from an artisan or a high-end maker like Castello, they typically use or they should be using, high-end briar, which has been cured longer, the tannins have been boiled out, and it's going to have a sweet smoking taste from the beginning. Or a brand new old pipe from the 70s that's just been drying for that long, or 60s or 70s. An old, brand new Algerian briar pipe should have similar qualities with a very sweet smoking pipe from the beginning, opposed to a lower end pipe which was just going to take more breaking in to get rid of that acrid taste that you may taste. And all pipes may have it to an extent depending on the heat. But there is a big difference in the quality of the briar and how sweet it smokes. And smoking sweet from the beginning is going to build up, a sweet smoking cake and make it smoke sweet throughout. And people do debate this, and we all have different palates and we all prefer different things. So I'm just stating mostly my opinion here on if it's better or not. Better isn't the right word, just different. I have cross grain pipes I love. I have rusticated pipes that I can't even see the grain that I love. I have straight grain pipes that just don't smoke good. There's an X factor in it where it's an organic material and you just can't always tell by looking at it.
Right.
You just don't always know.